So firstly, allow me to thank you for the opportunity I have to speak with you around this very important issue. I do know that many of our people really have questions, particularly around when it comes to our history and who we are as a people. And oftentimes we don't know who to speak to. So thank you for availing yourself to actually speak to us at Radio Eersteriver to inform our community around these very important topics. So let me go straight to the first question to you. Can you just quickly introduce yourself just to our listeners and tell them who you are and more about yourself? Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure to be on the show, especially on a topic that is so close to my heart. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. And yeah, my name is Indigenous, and I am the founding director of a company called Kx'am, which is green. And we are a non-profit company that researches, restores, and promotes Xam and Khoe Indigenous knowledge systems with the use of new media. And we're quite new. We had our first exhibition in March. And yeah, we've gone on to win some international awards, which is really cool. So I'm really excited about the work that we're doing, especially because of how important it is to 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 preserve and promote our identity and our culture, especially in South Africa, where we keep getting told that we are extinct and we don't exist, and just the levels of displacement, you know. So I'm very passionate about the work that we do and the communities that we serve. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome stuff. So, and once again, thank you for coming and availing yourself to be with us again. Let's jump right into the questions that I have for you today. First of all, we often hear historians and activists like yourself speaking about the San, the Khoi, and the Nama or First Nation people. But oftentimes we don't actually know who these people are. Can you just briefly explain to us who is the San, the Khoi, the Nama or First Nation people? Who are they? Where did they come from? And just so that we can have a better understanding of these very important people basically around the world.
Okay. First of all, I want to put a disclaimer out there. I'm no expert on Indigenous matters, but I will share my opinion to the best of my knowledge. I don't think an expert on First Nation people can exist because, first of all, we're such a diverse group of people, and because so much of our history has been decimated. But to answer your question, First Nation people in South Africa and of the world, because South Africa is like the cradle of humanity, or Africa at least, the Kxam people. The First Nation people are the Kxam people. We have the oldest DNA on the planet. We existed before the creation of South Africa as a country. We occupied areas throughout the African continent, but predominantly South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. There are terms that make reference to Kxam people like Khoisan, but these are contested for various reasons. Like Khoisan was a term coined by a German anthropologist in the early 1900s and is not the original term for First Nation people. Some people refer to the First Nation people as Bushmen and Hottentots, which are also considered to be derogatory terms by some, while other terms like Khoi, Kwe, Kwena are also used. Some people refer to the First Nation people as the San, while others argue that this is an acronym for South African Native and was also coined by another anthropologist. I personally use the term Kxam to refer to the hunter-gatherers and Khoe to refer to the pastoralists. But First Nation people were the first to occupy the African continent. We were nomadic, we lived by hunting and gathering, and we consist of various tribes, and each of those tribes have their own names, like the Kxam, the Nama, the Korana, and so forth. There's a debate about whether the First Nation was split into two groups, like the hunter-gatherers and the pastoralists, or whether we were all the same people in the beginning and just changed lifestyles based on environmental conditions. But we currently are a diverse group of people that constitute the First Nation in the country.
You spoke now about the tribes. Now, normally within Aboriginal tribes or within traditional groupings, we have what we call traditional houses or traditional leaders or your royalties. Does it also exist within the Kx'am, like you just mentioned, our communities or people?
Okay, all right. Okay. The Kx'am people did not have a hierarchical social structure. We were egalitarian. We believed in the equality of all human beings. As other nations evolved from the Kx'am people, such as the Korana, they developed their own hierarchical social structures, some of which included royalty, while others had chiefs and headmen. There are new royal houses being launched every day in the country, and I think this is a result of the desperation that First Nation people feel as a result of not being recognized by the state. And they see how successful other traditional leaders in the country have been, like the Zulu Nation with their king. And so it becomes a model to emulate. But they are also leaders who have been elected by their community as royals because they actively champion the causes of their people, as well as individuals who have been given the hereditary title of royalty because they come from a royal line, like the His Royal Highness King Michael Lynx of the Lynx Royal House.
Okay, so one thing I also wanted to ask you is around the religious practices of the Kx'am people. Like when I attended an exhibition, I think in the beginning of this year, organized by yourself, I was quite. I didn't know if you believe in Jesus Christ or not, or what are your religious practices, or does the Kx'am people actually have any religious practices per se?
I think presently the state of the religious practices of Indigenous or First Nation people is very varied. We have rituals and we have ceremonies, and we also have, you'll find people that are Muslim in First Nation, people that are Christian in First Nation. But if you look at, historically, there are lots of deities that are recognized by the Kx'am people. The primordial god is called Tui Huab, who governs daily life and controls the environment. There's Krachen, who's a praying mantis, and he's like a shape-shifting trickster. And there are lots of other deities as well, but primarily the Kx'am venerated nature. So we lived in harmony with celestial bodies and with animals, and many of our religious practices involved rites of passages and ceremonies that coincided with different phases of the moon, the changing seasons, life phases, or with power animals. There's also an understanding of a primordial energy that underlies all things that is utilized in ritual and healing practices. So yeah, we definitely have our own religions, if you can call it that. I would maybe term it spirituality. Yeah.
In your view, then, how do we then balance religion with tradition, specifically when it comes to Aboriginal communities? How do we keep the balance, or how do we balance between those two very individual things?
Sure. I can only speak from my personal experience. Because my spiritual practice or religious practices is so diverse, because my ancestry is so diverse. I mean, I have Kham ancestry, Zulu ancestry, I have British ancestry, German ancestry, and I have my own personal view on religion, on spirituality, on the world. And so my own practices are like a conglomeration of that. Like there's some ancestors of mine that were Catholic. So I have very strong Catholic religious practices. I go to church. I believe in Jesus Christ and Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and the Holy Spirit. And then I have my Kx'am ancestors. So I believe in ceremonies, I believe in ritual, and I do, what is required of me in that way. I have ancestors that were mages, or if you can call it that, who work in union with nature and the elements and the four directions. And so I think we should not box ourselves in as people and just try to stay aligned with what is love, what is light, what is unity, because whatever religion you practice, whatever spirituality you practice, there's always like an underlying core of peace and love and you know if we just stick to those and just like throw the labels out the window, I think we'd be further ahead in the world. But yeah.
That's actually so true. I think when you began, you spoke about the lack of recognition that many Aboriginal people face, and still in South Africa, even 30 years after democracy, we still don't have a recognized Khoi Kham community or leaders or whatever. We're still struggling to get that part of government. How then do you believe, or in your view, how do we then consider who is Khoi, who is Kham, or who can be considered to be Khoi? How do we do that? Because before you answer, many times we look at Twitter, for example, we see people always attacking colored people and questioning us who we are. We are not black, we aren't white, and then they say we want to be white, we want to be black, but yeah. So how do we think who can be considered to be part of Khoi or can be part of Kham in this relation?
Because Kx'am are the First Nation people of the world, right? I think the entire world is Kx'am, in my opinion, because our DNA is like the beginning of humanity, you know. But we also need to look at the fact that race is a political instrument, race is a political weapon that was brought into our country or onto our continent with the view to divide and conquer us. Race is not a biological fact. Race is a social construct. You know, we didn't have race before the colonizers came and told us, you're brown, you're black, you're white, you get to drink from that tap, you get to live on that part of land. You understand? So, you know, yeah, it's quite a complex issue in South Africa with whether we're Kham or colored. Colored didn't exist. Colored doesn't exist. Race doesn't exist. So, you know, I think we all just need to get back to our common humanity. That's the only truth.
Thank you for that response as well. Now going to our historical context of the country as a whole. So in 1652 or pre-1652, before Van Riebeeck came here, I actually researched this and I found it like more than 150,000 years ago. The Kham people, the Khoi people existed in part of Namibia, South Africa, and even Central Africa and Botswana, like you mentioned earlier. Can you just briefly explain to our listeners and viewers what the way of living, the language spoken, the trade and culture of the Khoi people was up until 1652? How they lived, what was the language spoken, how did they trade or did they trade with other communities or cultures around them? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Kx'am and the Khoe people, we lived across the African continent, like you mentioned. We were primarily nomadic people, moved around a lot. We lived by hunting, gathering fruits, plants, roots, herbs, and we herded sheep, goats, and cattle. We also occupied areas of the coast. We built fish traps and we lived off the fish that were caught. We were healthy. We lived long, harmonious lives. We often lived to be over 100 years in age. Mm, Several languages were spoken, one of the oldest of which is Kx'am, which is on the South African coat of arms, funny enough. The Xam and Khoe languages are referred to as click languages. We have between 4 and 5 different clicks in the languages, and there are different sets of vowels as well in these languages, like nasal vowels and elongated vowels. You know, in English, we just have our straight 5 vowels. So in the First Nation languages, there are different sets of vowels um, that guide you on how to pronounce the vowels. So I found that interesting to learn. Um, and South Africa lists our languages as extinct, but there are in fact lots of languages that are still being spoken that require recognition and to be preserved. There's Kx'am, Nama, Naro, Tora, Kwekwe, Nu, the list goes on, and there's also various dialects of these different languages. In terms of trade, the Kx'am and Khoe traded among one another as well as with neighboring tribes, and we traded with visiting nations from other countries, like the Portuguese that first came to South Africa. We traded livestock, we traded plant materials, water. We also traded metals and beads. With regards to the culture, Xam and Khoe had ceremonies that coincided with various rites of passages and celestial events. We would have rituals associated when someone was born, when someone was coming of age, different for women and for boys. I mean, for boys becoming men and for girls becoming women. And we also had rituals for marriage and for death. And there were rituals performed before hunting and rituals performed for healing purposes. And we also did rituals for different phases of the moon. The full moon was very significant to us. And we would wear primarily animal skin. And one could say that we invented the braai and biltong because we mostly barbecued our meat to eat. And we also dried a lot of our meat out for consumption at a later stage. So, yeah.
Thank you for your response to that question as well. And I want to go to the topic of Jan van Riebeeck. Very, I don't know, some will call him very important to our culture, to our country. Others will call him a very controversial individual. But what is your view on the impact that Van Riebeeck had when he arrived in the Cape? And what you say he still has an impact, or is the impact still felt since his arrival in 1652?
Yeah. Yeah, Jan van Riebeeck arrived in the Cape as a representative of the Dutch East India Company, and he was tasked with building a fort and making supplies available like food and livestock. And this fort was then later replaced by the Castle of Good Hope, which is the oldest colonial building in the country. And what initially began as a system of trade between the Dutch and the First Nation people, you know, it was like kind of cute in the beginning, one could say, because we were trading, and even Afrikaans evolved as a language because of the trading that was happening between the Dutch and the indigenous people, you know. So I guess that whole era was the origin of Afrikaans, which is one of our national languages. But then I think the Dutch started getting super greedy, you know, and they started dispossessing First Nation people of their resources, stealing their cattle, and then started dispossessing us of our land. And eventually, you know, at the height of the horror is when we started getting exterminated and enslaved, you know, where we were just being enslaved on the regular. The Castle of Good Hope, the history of Castle of Good Hope just elaborates on that, where they're just like torture rooms there. And it just got super horrific, you know. And also with a lot of us were killed with the smallpox epidemic that was brought to the country by Dutch ships, you know. In terms of the impact still today, I mean, if you look at the state of First Nation people, we're still in a state of dispossession, and we still suffer the consequences of the slavery and the genocide that our people had to endure. You know, we still don't have access to land, we still don't have access to resources. And if you look at it from an economic level, at a spiritual level, there is so much unrest, you know. And I mean, that event that you attended at the Castle of Good Hope that we hosted was, oh, if I had to tell you about what was happening behind the scenes on a spiritual level, it is wild. It is wild. And it is because of the spiritual unrest of all of the souls that were tortured and murdered in that place, you know, and in Cape Town, just as that whole city, because that was like really the center of where the colonial conflict happened. So yeah, man, there's a lot of the stuff that lives on still today that hasn't been dealt with.
Okay. Do you believe that South Africa should still be celebrating the legacy of Van Riebeeck? Because what we always see is that in the majority of our main roads here in Cape Town, we have where roads are being still named after Van Riebeeck, where we still have statues of Van Riebeeck, where we have buildings named after this guy. Do you still think that we must be celebrating him after what he and his people have been doing to not only the First Nation, but also the people of our country as a whole?
You know, I don't think that he should be celebrated at all. And I think the fact that there are still street names named after him and statues of him, I think this is a reflection of the diverse society we live in, and how large a portion of the affluent population in this country have a sense of superiority and entitlement to this country, and they believe that the First Nation people and other African tribes deserve to be oppressed, and that, colonization was a favor that they did for us, that we were uncivilized, we weren't human enough. And a lot of people in this country think that colonization was like a good thing. You know what I mean? So I think that the street names and the statues are testament to that mentality that it still exists, that needs to be dealt with, honestly.
And let's hope it happens sooner rather than later. I want to go now to the issue of identity crisis that many colored people face in our country. Now, I always say I'm a proud colored South African. I am a believer in youth development. I believe in my community being developed. We don't see that happening from a standpoint of even government at all three levels. They don't develop colored communities at all. Do you believe it's important for colored people to be educated and informed around what their history are? For example, I always say this scenario. We have been taught in school about Van Riebeeck first, but also of Saka Zulu, of the Zulu tribe. But what about Kratua, that played a remarkable role negotiating in that period of time? What about Katrina issue? Why are we being taught about those people who actually played a part in our lives as colored people, but also as Indigenous First Nation people? Do you believe it's important for our people to be taught about the history and being informed about who we actually are as a people?
Oh, definitely, absolutely, 100%. I think you use the term colored. Firstly, we have to understand that race, like I said before, is not a biological fact. It's a social construct. It's like money. Money itself doesn't exist. It's not an actual thing. We made it up as societies to give us something to measure economic value with and to trade with. Before that, we just used to trade and barter among ourselves. And at some point, we even used to use cowrie shells as currency. But money doesn't exist as an actual thing, and neither does race. Race doesn't exist. Colored was a racial term invented by the Populations Registration Act of 1950, which was the first policy set up by the apartheid government to divide and rule South African people. Many different people were classified as colored, including Xam and Khoe people, which essentially stripped us of our identities, our histories, our languages, our cultures, our traditions. Colored people in this country did not exist before 1950. And not enough information is being promoted about First Nation people, about our identity, our history, our ways of life, our Indigenous knowledge systems, our ways of being. The government, first of all, tells us we're extinct, and then continues to force us to identify with being colored. And I hear you when you're saying that you are proud colored, because I understand what you're saying. I'm not focusing on the racial term. I'm focusing on your emphasis on being a person who is being marginalized in this country, and who is fighting for the rights and the betterment of our people. But yeah, I think that the identity crisis has come about as a result of the genocide we suffered, and then being forced to identify with a racial term like colored, which doesn't exist. And it's very important for us to gain an education around who we are and our true history and our identity, because wow, it's wild out here, guys. There's so many different things that stem from that void, if you can call it that, of identity and history among our Indigenous people. I mean, we suffer the highest crime rates, gangsterism, violence, alcohol abuse, drug abuse. Our communities have such high challenges, it's ridiculous. And it's not being spoken about, it's not being addressed. And it comes, I think, as a result of the fact that, the genocide that we endured is not being dealt with, So it's very important that we learn who we are and where we come from, especially in terms of how to claim ourselves and to recreate ourselves moving forward, because there's a past, but there's also a present and a future, and we need to actively be creating and moving towards that future.
How do we then renew ourselves? How do we then portray ourselves, or who should we portray ourselves then to be if we are not to be called colored or black or white, or how do we then do that?
So the apartheid government instituted the racial policy, right, which was the Population Registration Act. And even though in 1991 this act was repealed, the 1994 government, the democratic government that was put in place, is still using the same racial policy, and they're using the ideology of economic empowerment as the reason, you know. But like currently we use the four categories: there's African, there's white, there's Indian, there's colored, you know, in these government forms that we fill in or whatever, which doesn't even make sense if you look at it, because two of those are nationalities, African and Indian, and two of those are race, colored and white. So the system we are using right now is currently inconsistent. Secondly, it's problematic because it's, by implication, what are they trying to say? Everyone that is doesn't identify as, everyone who is colored or Indian or white is not African. Why don't they just put it like across the board, like black? But they don't do that, you know. So it raises questions to say, what are they actually trying to say? That only black people are African and everybody else in this country is what? I don't know, you know. So they're deep inconsistencies. And even the United Nations released a report on the observations of the state of Indigenous human rights in the country last year. And they recommended that the government should disaggregate data about Indigenous people by including Khoi and San ethnic identities in the census, and stop forcing us to identify with this colored white black thing that they've got going on. I know that the government needs to find a way to make sure that they address the economic inequalities that we inherited from colonization and apartheid. But I think a different system can be put in place rather than continuing to perpetuate the very philosophy that apartheid was built on, you know, with this colored idea of colored or white or black or any of these silly labels we put on ourselves, you know. But yeah, I just think that we should get back to humanity. We're human beings. We all have human rights, and it's really just that simple, you know.
I hear you loud and clear. On the issue now of language, once again, which also plays a very important role, specifically in communication. You said now, I think you mentioned it 2 times, that the government is continuously saying that the language of the Indigenous Kx'am people are dying out or becoming extinct. You said they are not extinct. What do you then think, or do you believe that government is doing enough to actually provide support resources to enable people to start learning languages like Nama, or people like the Nama people spoke, or the Kham people speak about? I do know that Katrina is currently busy with teaching young children around the language, but do you think they're doing enough to actually advocate for greater learning of the language itself?
Okay, so there's the Pan-African South African Language Board, right, which is supposed to promote Indigenous languages, preserve and promote Indigenous languages. And I think it's difficult because none of our Indigenous languages are listed as official languages, number one. And they're looking at adding sign languages as the 12th official language. Where I'm just like, wow, you skipped all of us. You skipped all of our languages and you're going straight to, you know, I have nothing against sign language, but I'm just saying, you know, in with regards to the priority, like, wow. But yeah, PanSouth is published a couple of dictionaries. Like they worked with Oma Katrina to publish the new Afrikaans and English dictionary, which was released last year. But I don't think they're doing enough to promote our languages. I think, first of all, that our languages should be added as official languages in the country. And I think that PanSouth should be working actively towards creating programs that encourage learning the languages, you know, not just writing a book, because the book can sit there, the dictionary can sit there. First of all, how many people even know it exists? Second of all, you know, learning is interactive, especially when we deal with kids. It would be nice to have especially use, employ technology to promote the language, so languages, not language. So yeah, I think a lot more could be done. Definitely, definitely, definitely a lot more could be done.
Do you think that government is deliberately trying to suppress not only the identity of indigenous people, but also the languages that we speak? Do you think they're doing it deliberately as a attempt to actually completely ensure that the language doesn't exist anymore? Do you think it's a deliberate attempt by government on that side then?
Oh, this is off the record. I think that government is very sensitive around how to handle indigenous people in general, not just the language, because I think it threatens them, to be honest. I think they feel like we have a reputation of being quite militant, and I think they feel like we're gonna just show up and be like, look, we're the First Nation people, we own everything, you guys get off our country. And I think they're wary of not even, they're just trying to ignore the elephant in the room because they don't know where to start, and they can't guarantee an outcome. So if they just continue the lie that we don't exist, it makes the situation allegedly easier to deal with, outside of the fact that, in my opinion, there's a civil war brewing, because you can't continue to suppress and oppress people for centuries on end, and lie to them and say, okay, we're going to get to you, we're going to get to you, we're going to get to you. And the country has enough challenges as it is. It's load shedding here, it's water there, it's illegal mining here, it's crime there, it's, and these issues get compacted. And I just feel like they need to sit down and deal with us, because they are running out of time, and they're also getting a lot of pressure from the international community. The United Nations is really like, guys, South Africa, do the things, guys, do the things, you're not doing enough. So yeah, in my opinion, I don't think it's, I don't want to say it's deliberate, but it's definitely not an accident either.
Why doesn't the Kx'am people declare independence from South Africa? Why don't they ask for the land or declare the land theirs in the first place?
Sure. I think when we look at land, right? In my opinion, I don't believe in the ownership of land as such, because it's a natural resource. It's like oxygen, it's like asking who owns the air, or like the earth, who owns the planet, And as indigenous people, not only in South Africa, all across the world, we've lived in alignment and in harmony with nature, with the environment. And we have this deep reverence, respect for the earth that we live in communion with. And this whole idea of marking places, or creating borders, creating countries, and owning land is a very colonial concept. It's actually ridiculous, honestly. And in my opinion, I think that as indigenous people, we have a higher understanding of what land is and its usefulness. I'm not saying that we shouldn't own land, because I mean, land is tied to identity, it's tied to our rituals, it's tied to our history, it's tied to our legacy, it's tied to our resources, and our ways of life, So I do think that we definitely should have land, we should have access to land, we should have use of land. But in terms of owning it, I think, I just think that's a terrible global misconception. Really, I do. But yeah, and I think the reason we're not claiming independence and just like is because we have a higher understanding, we have a higher understanding of nature. And that's one thing that this colonial capitalistic life we are living just doesn't have. It just wants to commodify everything and just like make everything have a price tag on it. And no, 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 no. That's not us. That's not what we're about.
Back to the issue of languages. Now, let's say I always wanted to learn indigenous languages. I emailed the South African Language Board once to ask them to provide me with documents but they never responded, like all government departments don't. They never respond to emails and communications that you send to them. How does the one then, if you are interested in learning the language, how do you then, would you ask, where would you approach to actually learn some of these indigenous languages?
Yeah, so there's quite a few languages like we spoke of before, so it would depend on what language you want to learn. Different languages are accessible through different mediums, you know. I see on YouTube there's a couple of basic phrases of some of our indigenous languages where they have people speaking and pronouncing where you can learn clicks and some basic phrases. There are also dictionaries that have been published, you know, that can be accessed, and they, depending on what language you want to learn and who your social circles are, there are also people that offer in-person classes and WhatsApp classes and online classes, you know. So I think it would just be a matter of like asking around, firstly deciding what language you want to learn, and then asking around to say, okay, who offers Hora classes or who offers Khoe classes and that kind of thing. But it's very community based, you know. So I feel like if you're in touch with the people who speak the language, then it's easier to find out where to learn the language from.
I now want to touch on the topic of post 1994. So we all know that in 94, many people, like my father, for the first time were able to vote, and they voted by majority for the ANC to come into power. And I believe many people were quite excited when it happened. 30 years down the line, I don't think we are excited as they were back then to vote this party. But yeah, it's a topic for another discussion. Do you think, I don't know I think you touched on it a little bit, but do you think government has done enough to actually preserve the culture of not only indigenous communities, but we all know, for example, they pay millions of rands every single year to both the Abutembu as well as the Zulu tribes and people. We don't see it happening to Khoi or Kala or Kham people. Do you think they're doing enough to preserve the culture of indigenous First Nation people?
Sure, that's a straight no. I don't have to think twice about it. No hesitation. Absolutely, positively, no. The government, first of all, denies our existence. You know, they continue to perpetuate the genocide that stripped us of our identities, our histories, our indigenous knowledge systems. Only in 2021 were the Kx'am and Khoe leaders recognized by the state under the Traditional and Khoisan Leadership Act, which was intended to recognize First Nation traditional leaders and integrate them into the existing traditional leadership structures. But this act has been a source of controversy because the government requires that First Nation people fit into a very specific criteria before beginning to recognize them as traditional leaders, you know. And this often conflicts with how we live in actual fact or how we used to live historically. So what's happening is that it's going to cause a distortion of the facts, it's going to cause a distortion of history and our ways of life, you know. And the act itself is being delayed from implementation, which is another controversy. First Nation people were denied access to land restitution. We are then denied access to land restitution because we were dispossessed of our land from the 1600s, you know. And the current Land Act has a 1913 cutoff date. It only allows people to claim land back as a result of the apartheid dispossessions, not colonial dispossessions. So when we don't have access to land or claiming land back, none of our languages are being recognized as official languages of the country. They're not being taught in schools. We're still being classified as colored, and you know, we're not having any of our human rights being recognized. None of our heritage as Xam and Khoe people as being recognized in the country. Like, no, the government is sleeping on this so hard. They are sleeping on us. Like, it's no joke.
What do you think governments should do to have this issue addressed? You said they're doing actually nothing, which you all know they do nothing. But what do you think in the case of your community, of the indigenous people, what should government do to address this very important issue?
I think First of all, we need to stop classifying First Nation people as colored because, yeah, and we need to put into practice the names of our tribes for us to identify ourselves with. Our languages should be counted among the official languages of this country. Our history, our heritage, our indigenous knowledge systems need to be researched, preserved, and disseminated in schools and in the media consistently through advocacy programs. We need to have our national heritage sites preserved. The Land Act needs to be amended to allow for First Nation people to submit land claims. The government needs to formally recognize Xam and Khoe people as First Nation people. The government needs to take steps to facilitate dialogues with Kham and Khoe people on healing from the lasting effects of colonization and the genocide of our languages and cultures, including provisions of resources for a series of community-based workshops across the country. First Nation people need to be integrated into the current state of recognition of traditional leadership without forcing us to compromise our integrity. The state needs to invite a UN specialist repertoire on the rights of Indigenous peoples to visit South Africa and create a national acting plan on implementing Indigenous rights based on the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples outcome document. They really need to just wake up and be consistently consistently and diligently, that's the word, right? Proactive around promoting who we are and what we stand for.
Ms. Harris for President of the Republic of South Africa. I will vote for you. If you want to stand for president, I will do that. And I think it's so important to actually advocate for what we believe is right. I always say that I love politics because I believe it has the ability to really bring forth measurable change if it's used correctly. Because these people have so much power to really bring forth change which they don't use. It's quite ironic also to add that the same government who was always saying that people, they were oppressed or they were marginalized, doing the same thing to such a small minority group in our country. It's quite ironic that they are always saying that we are a liberation movement, yet they are still oppressing people today. And that's quite really sad. I really hope that it will change. They won't, but let's hope they will reconsider and use a conscience when it comes to those types of things. Okay, I want to go on to the next question. I do know we spoke at length about this, but once again, why do you believe that government has failed to recognize the Khoi Kham Indigenous people as part of South Africa, but also as the First Nation and also the rightful owners of our country?
I think, as I mentioned before, I think it's very fear-based. I think they fear us. I think I think that if they even begin to acknowledge us in the smallest way, it's going to give us the impetus that we are looking for, and it's going to inspire our revolution, if you can call it that, because like there's what is called the Khoisan revivalism that is sweeping the country at the moment, which involves a lot of First Nation people rising up, reclaiming our identities, taking up space, speaking out, fighting for our rights, and I think they fear the fact that we were going to come for everything, and yeah, I really think that is the problem. I think that is the problem. But I think this, like you said, the rightful owners of the country, I think that's also a very contentious issue because look at South Africa right now. We have so many different tribes. We have foreign nationals that even live among us. We have such a diverse nation, and I don't think it would make sense for us to lay claim to the country. Yes, we were here first, and yeah, but I think that is probably the reason that they are really fearful around how to handle us, and it's just becoming a bit of a hot issue, to be honest. It's really becoming a bit of a hot issue, but I think we need to make room for embracing a whole South Africa that doesn't that doesn't oppress us, that doesn't deny us, but also that doesn't oppress anybody else because maybe they came after us, you know. And I think we need to find a way to live in communion and community with each other and not try to claim a superiority over any of the other nations or tribes that live in the country at present, you know. So I think the government is afraid. But I also think they're hypocritical, and I also think that they're ignorant because there are a lot of government officials that are ignorant on us, and they're not even trying to find out, you know. So it's a complicated issue, really, honestly.
Okay, we're now going to go to the last topics for discussion today. So we're heading to the 2024 elections. I think it will be, okay, registration weekend is next week, and then we'll have elections in early next year. That's what was discussed so far. Do you see any significant changes happening post 2024 for people of Indigenous, but also for, I don't know, you hate that term, but for colored people as well? Do you see any significant changes? And in your view, what do you think, I don't want to put you in the spot now, what do you think is best placed politically to bring forth effective change for those two communities?
First of all, I don't hate the term colored. I recognize there are lots of people in the country that call themselves colored, identify as colored, and are proudly colored, you know. And I also don't want to divorce that from the conversation. I think that colored identity is a real thing. Yes, it was invented by 1950, but it has now evolved into a real something that people identify with, you know. So I don't hate the term. I just hate its origins, and I just feel like we're bigger than who we've been told we are. So yeah, heading post 2024 with the elections, guys. No, I don't think I don't think we're gonna be seeing any improvements. No, not if we leave it in the government's hands, to be honest. Which is why I'm so passionate about doing the work ourselves. Which is why I'm so glad that we had this interview, that we're having conversations like these, because it's really up to us to do the work. It's up to us to stand up and say, look, we're not going to be sitting around and we're not going to be silenced anymore. We're not going to be ignored anymore. And we're going to take up space. We're going to claim our human rights. You're going to give us what we need, and that is in our hands, you know. So um, I recognize the power of politics, but I only recognize the power of politics insofar as it is a reflection of what human beings can do when we stand together in an organized manner, you know. So I'm pro traditional leadership. I'm pro community standing up and saying, we're going to do this. I am definitely uninterested in actual politicians. And so I'm not in a position to answer your question to say who's best placed, because I've been voting every time and I spoil my vote. I exercise my right to vote, which is why I go there, because I understand people actually lost their lives to make sure that we had the right to vote. But I spoil my vote to say, actually, all you guys are just a bunch of clowns. I'm not interested in this for as long as you're going to live in this, like, oh, it's, oh, I don't know where to start with politicians. I don't know where to start. So yeah, I just feel like we should organize ourselves as people and get it together. We should just stop waiting for these guys to save our lives. They haven't. It's been centuries now. We've been waiting since 1652. So I don't think we should hold our breath on these guys at all. We should just organize ourselves and do the damn things ourselves.
So in Cape Town, where on the Western Cape currently, we have a movement called Cape Independence. It's actually getting traction right now as we speak. Do you believe that by having Cape Independence, if it succeeds, I don't know, I don't believe it will, but if it does, do you believe that that will enable traditional people, indigenous people, to actually once again get back their identity? Because they sound on paper, they sound quite nice, but my thing is also it goes down to implementation of the project. Do you believe in a Cape Independence will be able to provide your community with that specific issue?
First of all, I understand that the importance of people striving towards, I guess, a level of independence, because in the current state that we're living in as the country, we're just not being recognized, in this collective, in this alleged rainbow nation that we're living in. We're just not. So I can understand why people feel the need to want to push their own agenda to such an extreme. But I don't think it's going to be possible to live in a democratic country as a little exclusive independent nation, first of all. And I don't think that that is who we are. If you go back historically, we were never this. We lived in harmony with ourselves. We lived in harmony with each other. We lived in harmony with nature. We lived in harmony with spirit. And so we are actually, at the core, we are united. Even if you look at it from a quantum physics perspective, atomically, we are united. Division and separation is an illusion. So I don't think that anything based on people living in a corner trying to separate ourselves from anybody else is going to work. I don't think it serves our purposes. Um, and I also think we need to look at where we are and where we're working towards. I just think it makes more sense to work together with ourselves and with people who are not necessarily First Nation, and build our country, based on humanity, based on coming together and moving forward in recognition of who we are, and yeah, with just black peace, love, and respect, add a touch of hippiness into it.
You mentioned earlier about the issue of human rights, and something came to mind. Now we have a very beautiful commission in this country, the South African Human Rights Commission, that deals with all types of things when it comes to the rights of people. Have they in any way helped your community or the indigenous people to get what you need? I do know I do struggle a lot to get all of the South African Human Rights Commission. They don't respond to emails, they don't respond to calls, but have they been able to help you at all with what the indigenous people of this country is fighting for?
I've never approached the Commission of Human Rights, and I think I stand by what I mentioned in the previous answer around us organizing ourselves. I think we stand a better chance from gaining the cooperation of these state organizations or other organizations when we are organized. I think us ourselves as Indigenous people are very divided, and I understand why. But there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of betrayal, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of politics just among ourselves before we even talk about political structures in the country. And I think the important part is for us, first of all, to make room for our diversity, to come together as a unity. And then when we have a common ground from which to work from, we can then approach these organizations to say, here we are, you can't deny us anymore, and we demand your cooperation. But for now, it's difficult because we're working as individuals in silos. You're that tribe, I'm that tribe, I'm this royal house, you're that royal house. You killed us during the genocide. You were collaborating with the colonizers. You were collaborating with the apartheid government. It's very, it's contentious. So I think we should focus on uniting among ourselves and then work from there.
Any closing remarks from your side as we conclude this interview?
Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been lovely. I loved your questions. They were so thought-provoking. They're so important. You really hit the nail on the head on so many issues that are relevant to us, our history, our people, and what is required moving forward. A lot of people just get caught up in trying to complain about what's wrong, but we don't focus on what we need to do about it. So I just want to thank you for this opportunity. And I think in closing, I just want to call for us as First Nation people and allies of First Nation people, everybody in the country and across the world, to really just pull together and work towards our common humanity and instituting our human rights and the recognition of our human rights. And to celebrate ourselves. I think so. We spend so much time fighting, guys. We understand that it's a revolution. We understand we have to stand up and take up space and scream and say we're here. We're not gonna die. But we are so much more than that. We're beautiful. We have beautiful cultures. We have beautiful identities. We have rich art. We are amazing. So we should just stop once in a while and celebrate who we are. Like literally just celebrate the fact that we are here, we are breathing, and we are amazing, you know. But definitely unity. I would say we just need to pull together so that we have strength in numbers and unity. Yeah.
Do you have any future exhibition plans for Cape Town when it comes to informing and educating people on Indigenous communities? I do know I asked you the final question right now, but I can buy for
No, you can have all my time. You can have all my time. We are planning something. There's no date specifically. What we're working towards is putting together more sustainable and countrywide advocacy programs around, you know, who we are, where we come from, and what we'd like to work towards. So it wouldn't only be happening in Cape Town, but yes, there's definitely stuff we're working on, but it will post it to our website and our social media as soon as those are up and running. But yeah.
Awesome stuff. Miss Intelligent, thank you once again for the opportunity I have had to speak with you. It is baie geniet. I really enjoyed it. My Engels is basis op nou weer gaan eet en proef Engels nou. But thank you once again for the opportunity I had to discuss and to speak with you. I do know that our listeners will on Monday enjoy this conversation. It's really needed. We need to educate. We need to be developed. I always say here, that empowerment equates to knowledge and knowledge equates to empowerment. And I really know that we will be empowered and we will gain knowledge around this important issue. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much as well. Thank you. Thank you. This has been lovely.